Well, there was a little surprise twist in the press conference as Bernie Sanders came to the defense of Tulsi, also Julian Castro and Cory Booker, and took a huge swipe at the DNC and Mike Bloomberg. Let's talk about it. What is going on, everybody? Thank you all so much for tuning into this live stream segment of Mikasa Sukasa. And of course, as always, I am your humble host, Niko House. So Bernie Sanders just had a press conference in New Hampshire regarding the Iowa caucus debacle, where he proclaimed that when their mathematical errors are corrected and the rest of the tabulations are put in, that he has won the popular vote, also won the SDE count, or the state delegate count, and then they tied the national delegate count at 11-11. Now, he was also asked a series of questions after he finished his speech, and one of those questions was about the debates. What a surprise. It seems like people are paying attention. Uh-oh. That's bad news for the establishment. You know, they don't like when people pay attention, but we're going to listen to this question and Bernie's surprising answer.
Sanders. So Michael Bloomberg is skipping the early states. There'll be a debate tomorrow night. He won't be on the stage. Do you think it's fair that the Democratic Party altered or revised the rules to put him? Wait. Let me at least put the question all the way out.
Just give me the answer.
Even though I think you know where I'm going. You know where I'm going.
Okay.
Do you think it's fair that the rules are now allowing Michael Bloomberg to come in? And I'm looking at you as I see your slogan there, Bernie, not the billionaire. So could you comment also on the
rules? Do we have an S at the end of that?
S. All right. So could you comment not only on the debate, but on the even more money that Bloomberg is putting in the contest? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. And I knew what the question is. I was going to answer it the same way.
You got to make sure, though.
Okay. No, I think it is an outrage. Look, rules are rules. And people like Julian Castro played by the rules, campaigned really hard. Cory Booker played by the rules. Tulsi Gabbard played by the rules. Andrew Yang played by the rules. They were here in New Hampshire. They were in Iowa. They have worked really, really hard. And based on the rules determined by the DNC, they were unable to participate in one or more debates. And now suddenly, a guy comes in who does not campaign one bit in Iowa, New Hampshire. He's not on the ballot, I guess, in Nevada or South Carolina, but he's worth $55 billion. And I guess if you're worth $55 billion, you can get the rules changed for a debate. So to answer your question, I think that is an absolute outrage and really unfair. And I say this because these other guys are my friends, the people like Cory Booker or Julian Castro or Tulsi Gabbard, who work really, really hard. They were excluded, but they're not multi-billionaires. That's wrong.
Wow. That was a little surprising. It was you got to admit, even if you're a Bernie supporter, that was a little bit forward for Bernie, because he hasn't really been that forward when it's come to addressing the DNC or any of the other candidates, even the ones that he has had disagreements with, right? And to be honest, he's defended everybody, who calls him a friend anyway. He's defended everybody except Tulsi when it came to things like this, right? He defended Elizabeth Warren and Cory Booker in an open letter that he wrote to the Center for American Progress, and then gave that letter to the New York Times, where he basically threatened them. He threatened the Center for American Progress and said that he would use his leverage against them if they continued behaving the way they did. He actually he defended the DNC during his sit down with The View. He said that, it's not their fault. They have to make rules somehow. There's way too many candidates on the stage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So he actually defended the DNC when Meghan McCain asked, well, should he be standing up for Tulsi, like she stood up for him, especially because it's specifically regarding to the debates. So he's been a little bit, tepid when it comes to defending Tulsi, and more specifically, making clear that he has problems with the DNC, right? So this is a stark contrast from what we have seen from Bernie this last year, because this seems like this was something that has been on his mind, right? When the reporter went to go ask the question, he like cut her off. He cut her off and was like, oh, matter of fact, I'm glad you reminded me. He is clearly done with the DNC. He clearly wants to clean house. He has a very visible issue, right? It's visible, his disdain for Mike Bloomberg. And if you've been paying attention to the people on his campaign, like Nina Turner, like Bree Joy Gray, it's like very, because they usually don't even call people's names. If they have a problem with somebody, they don't even like calling people's names. But they have been very open about criticizing Bloomberg by name, calling him an oligarch, which he is, and making sure that everybody knows it. What does this tell me? Well, it seems like, and I could be wrong, it seems like Bernie is no longer living in fear of what the DNC could do to him going into the convention. I think that the polls having him look so well in New Hampshire are giving him confidence. I feel like the success Nina Turner has had in South Carolina, bolstering him there, not only securing endorsements from a lot of elected officials, but even turning some endorsements away from away from Biden to Bernie. Nina Turner got that done. So I think he's feeling confident in South Carolina. I think that he's feeling confident ahead of the California and Texas on Super Tuesday, which is March the 3rd. And I think that he is now beginning to signal to the DNC, if you keep trying to play me, I got something for you. I'm not going to let you continue to treat people like they're rag dolls. Like, I'm not going to let you continue to interfere with democracy. And I'm going to be covering an interview by Nina that kind of doubles down on Bernie's opinion in that regard. You know, whatever Nina says in an interview, that's generally, you know, you can assume a lot of the time that it's Bernie's opinion, because when she's speaking as a surrogate, Bernie can't say everything he wants to say because he has to keep it professional, but he has to keep it cordial. But Nina is under no such agreement, okay? And so even Nina doubles down on a lot of what Bernie says in this particular speech. What does this also tell me? It tells me that it is important to continue to speak out and let it be known what we agree with and what we disagree with, not only in regards to Bernie Sanders, but any candidate. Now, obviously, there is a way to critique somebody. You can critique someone as an ally. You can critique someone as an ally. You can critique someone as an ally. It is okay. Me and my best friend, most of our conversations, if it's not about basketball or Marvel, it's about self-reflection and how to better ourselves and being honest with one another. He wouldn't be my best friend if that was not the case, because we all have our blind spots. And that is no different for politicians. In fact, I would say it's even more true for politicians, especially when you're, old and set in your ways sometimes. So it's important to make it known how we feel when certain things happen. Like, hey, this isn't cool. Can you please speak out? This isn't cool. Can you please speak out? I'll give an example. Andrew Yang's people have been quite pissed over the last 3 days at what happened in Iowa, the things that they personally suffered from, being kept from caucusing. If they did make it into the caucus, some people were not allowed to vote. They were like, oh, we're done. The second alignment's over. And they're like, what? They had precinct captains who were disqualified for being precinct captains merely because they were from outside of the state. Like, that's not legal. That was not a thing. They just made that up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? They have been speaking out about this, asking Andrew Yang to speak out about this as well. And we finally got a statement from Andrew Yang of him condemning what took place in Iowa. rather than acting like it didn't happen and trying to move on. And accountability is important. Everybody wants to say move on, move on, move on. You cannot move on without accountability, because otherwise there is no guarantee that there were any lessons learned, nor did we introduce any potential for a deterrent of that same problem happening in future states, right? So Andrew Yang's people spoke out, eventually commanding Andrew Yang to speak out. Tulsi's people speak out all the time. So that's, y'all should already know that by now. Bernie's people, even people that not exclusively support Bernie, I won't say that, but they've endorsed Bernie, they prefer Bernie over anybody else. Even his people have begun to ask of him to speak out in support in Tulsi Gabbard. They realize how much Tulsi, a lot of people who have come into the game a lot later, they realize how much they appreciate Tulsi and how much she had been taken for granted. And even if Bernie and Tulsi do talk behind the scenes, which they are friends, so I'm absolutely positive they do, optics matter in politics. Tulsi was getting dragged through the dirt, and progressives were dragging her on behalf of Bernie, which Bernie, I can tell you, and Nina, I know for a fact, do not approve of and did not approve of. So people speaking out about that likely made him remember to say, he's like, yeah, we might have talked about something behind the scenes, but it is also important for me to speak up right now. Not just when, some things could just be understood. Some things could be assumed. I've never assumed that Bernie and Tulsi were not friends because Bernie didn't speak out in support of her on a given issue. It was still irritating because if you're involved in politics, you do know that optics matter, and people will begin to make excuses rather than saying, hey, you should speak out. Because when Tulsi speaks out about Bernie, it is immediate. Tulsi spoke out in support of Bernie knowing it could hurt her political prospects. Because you're saying, think about the Warren situation. You're saying in the exact same situation, Warren, Bernie praised me and said, good luck, and gave me full support. And so whatever you're claiming, I don't know what you're talking about, because that's not how Bernie is. Tulsi basically said, as a woman of color, white woman, you are lying about that white man. And if you understand how social dynamics, if you understand how that works in the real world of the left, that was a big deal. Women of color saying that a white woman making a claim of sexism is wrong by all she understands about the situation could have been very damning for Tulsi Gabbard. Okay, you got to understand that. You just got to understand the dynamics of society when it comes to race, intersectional feminism or lack thereof, white feminism. These are all things that you have to consider when you're making any move. Things that Tulsi doesn't consider, by the way, because she's sometimes oblivious to things like that. But she puts herself on the line, even with her own supporters, to do the right thing. And a lot of the time that involves defending Bernie where she feels like it needs to be defended. But that's also a standard that Tulsi supporters hold her to. So now we get to Bernie Sanders, his own supporters have made it clear that they would like to see him speak out more. Tulsi supporters have made it clear that they would like to see him speak out more, not only for Tulsi, but calling out the DNC in their rigged rules, in their rigged primaries. Now we have seen a consistent pattern through the last 3 days. He calls out the wrong results. He says, oh no, there were mathematical errors and they will absolutely be addressed and corrected. He calls out the fact that the Iowa Democratic Party has ensured that people will continue losing faith in democracy until we address this issue, of whatever the hell kind of discombobulated chaos that was over the last 3 days. He's also come out when that's a question in the past that Bernie would have dodged. Not maybe 2-3 years ago, but this year, that is a question that Bernie would have dodged or answered wrong. However, he said, no, these are my friends. They played by the rules and they're being excluded. That is wrong. That, you know what I'm saying? Like, he calls the DNC out. It's like, no, what? Because they're not billionaires? That's fine. That's fair. No, that's not fair. They shouldn't have been excluded. He's like, rules are rules. They shouldn't have been excluded if you were going to change the rules for them. But that doesn't come unless you Just hold your candidate accountable. Say, Bernie, you got to do better in this regard. Tulsi, you got to do better in this regard. And move on. It's that simple. That's it. I also think it says something else too. Bernie remembering to say Tulsi's name right about now, because before he's been a little bit shy about it, right? We can all admit. Choosing to say her name and making sure that it's made clear right about now is signaling something to Niko. He said everybody's name, right? He said Yang, Castro, Cory Booker. I want to be clear about that. So he did say, but making sure, because before, even if he said everybody else's name, he would still exclude Tulsi. So I believe he's beginning to send a smoke signal to the establishment. Like, hey, I don't know if y'all know this, but this team, we ain't going nowhere, and you better get used to it. Now that's purely speculative. It is likely wishful thinking, but Bernie is very deliberate with his moves, right? He is very calculating. Sometimes he's over calculating, but he does make sure he's measured in his words, and he sends off signals. Sometimes it's what he's about to do. Sometimes it's to throw you off. Sometimes it's to warn you, right? So the signal he's been sending out for the last 3 years to the establishment is, oh, I'm so aloof. I am not anticipating rigging at all. I am playing along with all of your narratives because I actually believe all of your narratives, don't I? Yes, I absolutely believe that there was absolutely no rigging in 2016, and I am totally not paying attention or looking out for that. Oh, by the way, here's an app to catch all of your fucking rigging. Here you go. Thank you, give my fucking delegates. That was a signal he set up. He played possum, right? The signal that he sent off when he sent that letter to Center for American Progress and then made the letter public to the New York Times was that if the CAP and the DNC fucked with him to a degree that pissed him off, then he was going to bring the hammer down on them using all the leverage at his disposal. That was a warning. When he came out and released the results in Iowa, that was a signal. He released his results first, saying, try me if you want to. Try me if you want to. If the reports are true and he had his lawyers meet up with the DNC and he released those results, try me if you want to. Try me if you want to. I got everything. Please, let's make this as public as humanly possible. Let's do it. He said, try me if you want to. That was the signal. This press conference, if you listen to it, he was very clear that there were mathematical errors. We're fixing them and they're going to be fixed. Like he sends signals in different ways. That's kind of how he's always been. He's always been measured. He's always been calculated. Sometimes he's too calculated. Sometimes it's a perfect amount of calculation. But if he says something, there's a reason he said it the way he does. He doesn't act emotionally, right? He doesn't act emotionally. He reacts to get a certain reaction. That's just how he is. And it probably comes from being a loner and an independent for his whole life. So when he says that, he's signaling something. He says, even if he might be wrong, in my opinion, about Booker or Julian Castro, he's signaling, he's like, these are the people that I consider my allies. I don't consider Bloomberg my ally. I don't consider the DNC my ally. But these are the people I consider allies. Even though I think he's wrong about 2 of those people, right? Granted. But he probably included them because that's how, once again, he's calculating. I got to say some establishment people too, because they've been kept off the debate stage. But if I don't say them and I just say Tulsi, that's going to be a whole headline and da-da-da. Like that's what he's a chess player. That's how he runs through his thoughts. But he said Tulsi's name, and that means something. If you have been paying attention to how Bernie Sanders is, that means something. He's signaling. What that signal is, I guess we won't know until later. But at the bare minimum, we now know, if you have ever doubted, that he has not forgotten about Tulsi, although we would have, yes, we would have liked for him to speak up more in her defense. I don't like the idea of him having to speak up every single time. something happens to her, I don't like that, because she still is a very strong, independent woman who can handle her own. But there are just certain things that are systemic wrongdoings that you like if you're going to speak up. By the way, Nina came to Tulsi's defense again the other day in the interview, it was talking about Bloomberg. But if you're going to speak up again, you got to speak out against systemic issues that could wrong anybody. That's really what the issue is. And so that's why he spoke up for Warren and Cory Booker in the beginning of the year. So that is where people were like, hold on. Okay, maybe you're not going to call out the media for attacking Tulsi all the time. Okay, cool. But if you see a systemic wrong happening to not only a colleague, but a friend, a co-founder of the Sanders Institute and a fellow of the Sanders Institute, somebody who has sacrificed her career for you, and she's being inhibited by the exact same system that tried to oppress you in your campaign, then it becomes a problem. So I would have liked for him to speak up more, of course, but we cannot assume that because he didn't speak up every single time that they're not friends or something like that. He's calculated. Sometimes he gets his calculations right, sometimes he gets it wrong, but once again, the important thing is that we remember to remind him, hey, you have a friend in this race and you cannot forget that person. Because then it gets kind of worrisome, because we get worried, hey, you might forget us if the pressure comes down too hard. And we don't want that, do we? Right. Correct. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for tuning into that segment of Mikasa Says Sukasa. We'll be back soon. But other than that, if you have to go, you'll be back later. Always remember, more than anything else, find your balance. Peace.